Well, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode. Today we are joined by Mike Hamilton, the OECTA Union President. Um, we're going to discuss tonight negotiations between the education workers in the Catholic District School Board of Eastern Ontario and the PSAC strike. Hello, Mike. How's it going?
Not too bad. How are you, Nolan?
Doing good. So we'll start off with the PSAC strike because as you know, it's a big topic going on right now. So as a union president, what was your first reaction when you heard about this strike?
Well, I know that they had taken a strike vote. They had come to an impasse with their employer, the government, and so they're exercising their democratic right to go on strike as a means by which to put pressure on the employer, the government of Canada, to take more seriously their demands in their collective bargaining process. So I fully support any union that's going to go on strike and use that as a tactic to bargain.
Great. Okay. So where do you stand on the government's efforts so far with the strike, meaning like proposes and stuff?
Yeah. I have to say I'm somewhat disappointed. The rhetoric we hear from the prime minister is frequently that the middle class are burdened by out of control inflation, and yet here are workers that work ostensibly for him that are saying, "Yeah, you're right. We are burdened by inflation, and we'd like you or your government to do something about it." And instead, he's giving $13 billion to Volkswagen, a foreign company, to build a plant in St. Thomas. Not that that's not good economic sense, but where's some money for the people that actually, process our taxes and our passports and all the rest of the good work that PSAC members do?
Okay,
No.
and a big topic has been possible back to work legislation similar to the one Stephen or Minister Lecce introduced this past fall. So could you see possible back to work legislation put on the table by the Trudeau government?
I think it would be the wrong play for them at this point. It's been a strike of 8 days so far. I've heard the Minister of Labor, Seamus O'Regan, speak frequently about the sacredness of the collective bargaining process and speak about the importance of labor in Canada. So to enact back to work legislation would just be a slap in the face to working people who are part of unions and rely on the collective bargaining process to have their working conditions arranged and spelled out for them. So I hope not.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's only been an 8 day strike. So do you think the time, like the amount of days the strike has been on for would be a factor in the decision of back to work legislation? For example, the CUPE union wasn't even on strike for 1 day, and the minister put forward back to work legislation to essentially stop the strike. So do you think the length of the strike matters? As do you think that would be important?
Obviously, it's a factor. Just for clarity, though, the Ontario government's attempt blew up in their face, right? I mean, they were on the brink of a general strike with the use of the notwithstanding clause and their attempt to stifle QP's work action. So, such a thing can have dramatic political consequences. But yes, to your question, the length of the strike does certainly it's a piece of the pie in terms of determining one's response. However, from what I understand, just from watching the news last night, the longer the strike has gone on, the more public support PSAC has received. So, again, it's a political question and one that the Liberal Party needs to consider very carefully, I think.
Okay.
Okay, do you see the government of Canada and the PSAP workers coming to an agreement anytime soon?
I think that the longer it goes on, obviously, the closer we get. Again, my figures are off, but I know that there were over 500 proposals that were put on the table with PSAC's initial offer, and the majority of those have been either met or bargained in one way or another. So we're really down to, I think, the key issues of fair wages in the face of the inflationary crisis that we're in. Their ability to work remotely, which they did, you know, on the flip of a dime and quite resiliently throughout the pandemic. And we've learned, as we are experiencing right now with remote technology, we can have a conversation from Ingleside and Ottawa, and I don't know where you are, Elliot. You're in Toronto somewhere, GTA.
Oakville.
Oakville. So, you know, the technology exists for such, and I think that the government's demand that people go into the office 2 to 3 times a week is reasonable. I think they just want some kind of language in their contract that offers them that right to do remote work. And then the other thing is job security as well, right? We saw the latest federal budget come out, and it is rife with cuts to a number of different departments and programs. And they just want some assurance that the work that they do is protected.
Mhm. Okay, so what types of you touched on this, but like more specifically, what types of things is your union looking for in the negotiations?
Yeah, we'll talk about your like the upcoming negotiations with the Ford government and yourself now.
Sure. So just quick correction, you introduced me as the president of OECTA. I am not that. I am the president of the Eastern Unit of
Yeah.
OECTA. There's 72 units across the province. And we are governed by an executive that does have a provincial
Oh, yeah.
president. I am not that,
Yeah.
but I am a local unit president.
Yeah.
So the School Board Collective Bargaining Act, it outlines how teacher contracts are bargained. So there's two parts to it. There's a part A, which is called central terms, and then there's a part A called local terms. And central terms are all the dollars. They revolve around salaries. They revolve around class sizes, because the bigger the class, the fewer teachers. The smaller the class, the more teachers required. So that costs money. It involves prep time, because depending how much prep time you get, again, reflects on how many teachers are going to be needed in any given school. It also deals with our benefits and does have some pension implications as well. So that's the bargaining that's going on right now. Our contract expired August 31st of 2022. Prior to the contract expiring, our provincial bargaining team gave notice to bargain, which is how the process begins, to the government on June 6th. So it's been since June 6th that we've been ripe and ready to sit at the table and bargain. And here we are 10 months later, and we've had 20 days. So in 10 months, we have met with the government and with representatives of the Catholic school boards only 20 times. And the frustrating thing about this process is that one of the first things that happens at a collective bargaining table is the two parties decide on the scope. In other words, what they're going to bargain. What do we want to discuss and what's not open for discussion? The parties haven't even agreed on scope yet. And we are almost in May. So some things have been agreed to that, okay, although we don't have the big ticket items agreed to, we will do some housekeeping and some other things. However, it's been very frustrating for our provincial bargaining team, because it seems like there's an intentional effort to dismantle is not the right word, but to not make a fair and consistent effort to address the concerns that we have. So OECTA has brought some of these complaints to the labor board in order to have an arbitrator decide. When there seemed to be some action happening, OECTA backed off and said, okay, you know what, we'll put our labor board complaint on hold and let's get some momentum. Unfortunately, that momentum never really spun. And so we're back before the labor board, trying to get some of these more contentious issues ironed out. I did learn just today that there are some dates set up for May. I think we've got 4 more dates set. But like I said, it really feels like the bargaining process is derailed at this point. Despite our efforts to continue to show up prepared with a proposed offer and work out the details at the table.
Okay, and you touched upon this a little bit, but how are the negotiations going so far with the Ford government? You said there hasn't been any big ticket items yet, but do you expect it to get any better in the future?
Well, Nolan, I am an optimist, but I am finding it harder and harder these days as I get updates from our provincial bargaining team. You know, I mean, I can just say that if I can quote you from an update, the government is repeatedly derailing the bargaining process while pushing significant strips to our collective bargain, our collective agreements. Whenever an employee group comes into bargaining, sort of the rule of thumb is that you want status quo, you want what you've got, plus, right? And it would be through the process of negotiations where you know it's determined, okay, well, if we can get this, we'll give away this, or if we can get this, we'll minimize this demand, what have you. That is not what's happening. Instead, the government and the Ontario Catholic Trustees Association are saying, well, we want to take this, we want to take this, we want to take this. There's 4 or 5 really major things that they're looking at manipulating that well, okay, you're going to take that. What are you going to give us in return? And the answer, as far as I understand it, is a shrug, right? So if you think about it, you know, when you're playing with your brother and you go over to your brother and say, I want the ball. Well, your brother's going to say, well, what am I going to get for it? Right? And if you say nothing, chances are you're not going to get that ball unless it's just thrown directly into your face. And we're kind of feeling like our contracts are being thrown directly in our face at this point.
Okay, and
but I am still hoping.
Okay, and I know we don't want to get ahead of ourselves on anything, but what, and I know we're still early in the process, but what would trigger a strike in the future?
Well, there'd have to be, you know, we were talking earlier about how long does the strike go on? Well, how long does bargaining go on, right? How long do we sit patiently and wait for some reasonableness from the other side of the table before we say, okay, push has come to shove? The first thing that would have to happen is that it would have to go before the labor board, and the labor board would have to determine that, yes, the 2 parties are too far apart to come up with an agreement. And they would issue something that's called a no board report, which just means there's nothing happening at the bargaining table. And so we're going to kick it up a notch. At that point, either side, both the employee and the employer, have, depending on how you read the legislation and the timelines, but they have roughly 2 weeks to identify either to the employer, we're going to go on strike, or the employer can say, we're going to lock you out. We're going to prevent you from going to work. And during that period, bargaining needs to continue. And really, that's when, you know, your feet are under the fire. We've got 2 weeks here. Can we settle these differences? Can we come up with a deal? And after that period has expired, then either party can either go on strike or lock out. If a labor union is going to ask its members to go on strike, there needs to be a strike vote. So that would happen likely before the no board report is issued, so that we know that we've got our membership behind us and that the issues that we're fighting for are ones that are important to them as well, which we know they are because we survey our members before we even draw up our initial proposal. So the short answer to your question is we're certainly not going to see that before the end of this school year. It will depend what happens over the summer and through the fall. Again, being an optimist, I hope that we don't get there. When I was in my first year in this role, I had to manage and organize a strike action, and I can tell you, I'd rather not have to do that again. But by all means, I will be, full of vinegar if that needs to happen, and I will guide my members to the picket line to demand, a fair negotiation process and a fair contract at the end of the day.
Okay.
And you mentioned this into the looking forward, there probably won't be another strike till like the fall. So, or even the future after that. So how likely is it that like in the fall or like after the fall there will be another strike?
So, I mean, the other thing to keep in mind, Elliot, is that once a strike vote has been taken, and obviously the majority of members are in favor of a strike, and typically we get very strong turnout and returns. I think at the last strike, we had 98% of our members in favor of striking. That puts you in a position then for any kind of job action. So you might remember back a couple of years ago, things like extracurricular activities, which are volunteer, right? Teachers do that voluntarily, they stop, right? I remember the first job action I was ever on back in '97 when Mike Harris was premier. We were prevented as teachers from bringing home any planning or any marking, right? Which was really a burden on the teachers, but especially for me, I was a brand new teacher. That was my first year teaching. But it was like, we're not going to do anything that's outside of the realm of our contract, including planning for lessons and doing the marking. Extracurriculars, field trips, those kinds of things, organizing guest speakers, all of those things are outside the realm of our contract, outside of our job description, but obviously we do them because we know they're in the best interest of the student. But work action is another tool that we have available to us, again, to put the pressure on. So I think before you saw, picket lines and teachers out on the streets, you would see that gradual increase of job action through these kinds of work refusals or just refusing to do that which is not contractually obligated.
Right.
Okay. Is there anything else you would like to add before we sign off?
Well, I think I'd like to add that, teachers do the work that they do for their students, right? And honest to God, as a classroom teacher, I can tell you that my best interests are the best interests of my kids. A happy teacher makes for a happy classroom, makes for a happy student. And if teachers are overburdened with work, if they're being downloaded new curriculum with no training, new requirements with no extra funding, larger class sizes, all of the things that we're seeing that are going to be the result of the latest provincial budget and some of Lecce's proposed legislative changes, as well as directions to the ministry and to school boards, we're going to see teachers not happy. And when teachers aren't happy, they just aren't as equipped to do the job to the fullest of their ability. So, I think it's important that we remember that, the classroom environment is, the teacher in the front of the room has a huge effect. And I'm sure you both know this from your experience in classrooms. That attitude of the teacher is integral to the learning environment and the attitude of the students. And if teachers are burnt out or overburdened or overwhelmed with large class sizes, they can't give as much as they want to their students.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mike Hamilton, President of the Eastern Ontario unit of OECTA.
Thanks, gentlemen. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.